Keanu Reeves walked into the dojo with the same quiet steps that he used in everyday life. He did not push the door open with force, nor did he make any loud announcement of his arrival. He simply entered, as if he was just another visitor. For most people in the world, Keanu was a huge Hollywood star, a man known for action movies, gunfights, car chases, and breathtaking stunts. But here, in this small martial arts school, he seemed almost invisible, dressed in plain clothes, blending into the background like any ordinary person. The dojo itself was alive with energy. The floor echoed with the sound of feet hitting the mats. Wooden swords clashed in practice, and the sharp commands of the instructor filled the air. Young students in white uniforms bowed, moved, and practiced their forms with excitement. But soon a ripple went through the room. It started as a whisper at the back, and then it grew louder. Someone had recognized him. "That's Keanu Reeves," a teenager whispered to his friend. His eyes widened as if he couldn't believe it. Within seconds, the words passed from one student to another. Soon, almost everyone knew Keanu Reeves was standing inside their dojo. Some of the younger students froze in their movements. Their punches grew weaker. Their stances shook, because their attention was no longer on training but on the tall, calm man by the door. Even the older students, the ones with colored belts around their waists, glanced at him again and again. Some smiled nervously, some whispered, and others tried to act tough as if the arrival of a movie star meant nothing to them. But deep down, everyone was curious. The dojo master noticed the sudden change in the atmosphere. He looked at Keanu, who stood respectfully, his hands loosely at his sides, waiting. The master nodded politely, as if saying, "Welcome." Keanu bowed in return. It was a small gesture, but it carried deep respect. At that moment, the students saw something they did not expect. Keanu Reeves, the action hero they had watched fight villains on screen, was showing the humility of a beginner. Keanu's presence did not carry the weight of fame. He was not surrounded by bodyguards. He did not wear expensive clothes or sunglasses. He had no camera crew following him. He was simply there as a man interested in learning. His hair fell casually around his face, and his eyes were calm. He looked more like a traveler stopping by than a Hollywood celebrity. The students could not hide their excitement. For them, movies like The Matrix and John Wick were almost sacred. They had memorized his moves, copied his fighting stance, and dreamed of fighting like him one day. And now, here he was, in their dojo, standing just a few feet away. A few students giggled, whispering that maybe he would perform a stunt or demonstrate a move. Others imagined how amazing it would be to spar with him, to see if the legendary John Wick skills were real. There was electricity in the air, a mixture of nervousness, joy, and challenge. Some of the bolder ones smirked, whispering to each other that maybe they should test him. After all, they were real martial artists and he was only an actor. But Keanu did not seem bothered by the chatter. He walked slowly to the side, removed his shoes quietly, and bowed again toward the mat. He treated the dojo with the respect it deserved. His every action was gentle, almost shy. He did not demand attention, yet his presence attracted every eye in the room. The whispers grew into soft laughter in one corner. A group of teenagers, full of pride and energy, looked at Keanu as if he were a challenge waiting to be taken. They thought, "He fights in movies, but here in the dojo we fight for real." Their confidence made them restless. Their eyes followed his every move, waiting for a chance to prove themselves. Meanwhile, Keanu greeted a few students with a kind nod. His smile was small but genuine. He asked simple questions about their training, complimented their effort, and listened carefully to their replies. For a man who had worked with world-famous martial arts choreographers, his words carried no arrogance. He did not boast about his experience, nor did he pretend to know more than them. He simply acted like a student eager to learn. The dojo, which had been loud with the sound of training, grew strangely quiet. The students were caught between awe and mischief. The master, sensing the rising tension, watched carefully. But Keanu remained calm. His body language showed no fear, no need to prove himself. He was at peace, like a monk walking through a busy market. And so, the atmosphere shifted. The dojo was no longer just a training hall that evening. It had become a stage where reality and imagination were about to collide. The students who once saw Keanu as a distant star now saw him standing before them, humble yet powerful in his quietness. They did not know it yet, but this ordinary beginning would soon turn into a story they would remember for the rest of their lives. The dojo was still buzzing with whispers about Keanu. The younger students could not stop stealing glances at him, while the older ones tried to act calm, but were secretly filled with curiosity. The idea that a Hollywood star was standing in their training hall made the air feel heavier, like a storm about to begin. Among the group of students, a few teenagers stood out. They were full of youthful pride, their belts showing they had spent years training. In their minds, they were not beginners anymore. They believed they had earned respect. And now, seeing Keanu Reeves standing quietly in the corner, they felt an unusual urge. To them, this was a chance to prove something. One boy, taller than the rest and carrying a confident smirk, leaned toward his friends and whispered, "He's just an actor. He pretends to fight on screen. But here, let's see if he can handle the real thing." His words lit a fire in the others. Their eyes narrowed and their smiles grew sharper. The thought of testing Keanu became more and more tempting. The dojo master had gone to the far end of the hall, arranging some practice weapons and giving instructions to a pair of students. This gave the teenagers the freedom to do what they were planning. They grabbed a pair of nunchucks from the rack, spinning them clumsily at first, but then faster, as if to show off. The sound of the chain whistling through the air drew the attention of everyone nearby. The tall boy looked at Keanu, who was still standing calmly, watching the other students train. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He was clearly not trying to impress anyone. He had no desire to take the spotlight. But to the group of proud teenagers, his calmness was almost an invitation. They mistook his silence for weakness. "Hey, Keanu," one of them called out, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Show us some of your movie moves." The dojo grew quieter. Some students chuckled while others held their breath. Waiting for what would happen next, Keanu turned his head slightly toward the voice. His expression remained soft, almost kind. He gave a small smile and said nothing. The teenagers weren't satisfied. They wanted more. The tall boy spun the nunchucks again, this time stepping forward. His friends followed, forming a loose circle around Keanu. The challenge was clear now. They wanted to see if the man on the movie screen could survive in a real dojo. The boy's eyes gleamed with mischief as he twirled the nunchucks faster. The chain clinked with each spin, the wooden end slicing the air dangerously close. "Come on, show us what you got," he said. His tone carried arrogance, as if daring Keanu to respond. Around them, the other students watched silently. Some of them were shocked at the disrespect. Challenging a guest inside the dojo was unthinkable. But others were excited, hoping to witness a fight they would never forget. The energy in the room shifted, no longer filled with disciplined training but with restless anticipation. Keanu stood in the middle of it all, still as calm as ever. He didn't flinch, he didn't step back, he simply observed. His eyes followed the movements of the boy with the nunchucks, but his body remained relaxed. The contrast between the teenager's wild energy and Keanu's peaceful stillness was striking. The tall boy grew bolder. He swung the nunchucks closer, the wooden end snapping past Keanu's shoulder, barely missing him. Gasps filled the room. A few students covered their mouths, unable to believe what they had just seen. The attack had been reckless, and if it had landed, it could have hurt. But Keanu did not move. He allowed the strike to pass harmlessly, as if he trusted the wind more than the weapon. The boy laughed, nervously, trying to mask his surprise. He expected Keanu to dodge dramatically or to block the weapon like in the movies. Instead, Keanu's calmness unsettled him. It was as if the man wasn't even playing the same game. His lack of reaction made the teenager feel smaller even though he was the one holding the weapon. "Is that all?" Keanu asked softly. His voice was so calm that it silenced the whispers around the room. The boy's smirk faded. He hadn't expected such a composed response. For a moment, he felt the eyes of the whole dojo pressing on him. The challenge he'd thought would make him look strong was now turning into something else. The friends behind him shifted uncomfortably. They had joined in thinking it would be fun, but now they weren't so sure. Keanu's presence was not like the characters he played in films. It was even stronger, not because of flashy moves, but because of the quiet confidence he carried. The dojo master returned at that moment, his sharp eyes landing on the scene. He saw the boy with the nunchucks, the circle of teenagers, and Keanu standing peacefully in the middle. The master's expression grew stern, but before he could say a word, Keanu raised his hand gently, almost asking for patience. He was not angry, not defensive, just calm. The room felt frozen in that instant. The students realized this was no longer just a playful challenge. Something deeper was happening. It was not about fighting, but about respect. The teenagers, however, were too caught up in their pride to understand it fully. They still believed they could prove something by testing him further. And so, the stage was set. The challenge had been thrown, the nunchucks had been swung, and the atmosphere in the dojo was heavy with tension. Every student's heart beat faster, waiting for the next move. But no one knew that Keanu's true response was not going to be made with fists or weapons. It would come with words, and those words would silence the entire dojo. The dojo grew so quiet that even the sound of footsteps outside seemed loud. The students stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the boy with the nunchucks and the man they all admired from the big screen. It was as if time had slowed down. The air was heavy with tension, and everyone knew that something important was about to happen. The boy spun the nunchucks faster. His hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from the pressure of being watched by everyone. He wanted to look strong, to prove that he was not afraid of Keanu Reeves. His friends whispered encouragement from behind, pushing him to continue. They wanted him to go further, to strike, to show that an actor's moves could not compare to a martial artist's. Keanu, however, remained still. His body relaxed, his face calm. He did not clench his fists, nor did he prepare for a fight. His eyes followed the nunchucks with quiet attention, but there was no trace of worry in them. To the students watching, his stillness was confusing. Some thought he was frozen, others thought he was waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simpler. He had no desire to fight. The boy's pride pushed him further. With a sharp yell, he swung the nunchuck straight toward Keanu's shoulder. The wooden ends cut through the air with a loud snap. The strike was powerful, enough to leave a bruise if it connected. Gasps echoed through the room. A few students even shouted in shock, expecting the worst. But at the very last moment, Keanu shifted slightly. He did not dodge in a dramatic way like in the movies. He simply leaned back a fraction, just enough for the nunchucks to miss him completely. The strike passed so close that the air brushed against his shirt, and then it was gone. The boy stumbled slightly from the force of his own swing. The dojo erupted in whispers. Some students covered their mouths. Others shook their heads. The boldness of the attack had shocked them. No one could believe that someone had actually tried to strike Keanu Reeves inside the dojo. It was not only disrespectful but also dangerous. Yet Keanu stood there without anger, as if nothing serious had happened. The boy felt a rush of heat in his face. He had expected Keanu to block the attack, to react like an action hero, maybe even to get angry. But Keanu's calmness made him feel small, embarrassed even. His friends pushed him again, telling him not to stop. Their pride was tied to his. Challenged now, and he could not back down, so he tried again, swinging the nunchucks lower this time, aiming toward Keanu's side. Once again, Keanu moved just enough to avoid the strike. It was not a fight. It was more like a dance. Keanu's steps were soft, measured, graceful. He avoided the attacks without making them look like a big effort. Every time the boy swung, the room grew louder with gasps and murmurs. The younger students were frightened, worried that someone would get hurt. The older ones were torn between excitement and shame. They knew this was no way to behave in front of a guest, especially someone who had bowed respectfully to the dojo, yet no one stopped it. All eyes were locked on Keanu, waiting to see what he would finally do. The boy's strikes became faster, more desperate. He was no longer calm, his pride was pushing him. But deep down, fear was starting to grow. He realized that no matter how hard he swung, Keanu was always one step ahead, always just outside the reach of danger. And the strange thing was, Keanu did not look like he was fighting at all. He looked like he was simply moving with the flow of the room. At one point, the boy swung too wide and the nunchuck slipped slightly from his grip. They spun dangerously close to his own leg before he caught them again. The students gasped loudly, some laughed nervously, but Keanu only tilted his head and gave a soft smile. It was as if he was silently telling the boy to be careful, not for his sake, but for the boy's own safety. This reaction made the boy even more frustrated. He wanted to see fear in Keanu's eyes, or at least anger, but he found none. The man in front of him was like a calm ocean, no matter how strong the waves of provocation became. His peaceful presence was unshakable. Finally, after several failed swings, the boy stopped. His chest was rising and falling quickly, sweat forming on his forehead. The dojo was silent again. Everyone waited for Keanu to respond. Would he strike back? Would he scold the boy? Or would he simply walk away? The tension was unbearable. Keanu looked at the boy for a long moment. His eyes were kind, not harsh. He took a slow breath, then stepped forward. The boy instinctively raised the nunchucks again. But Keanu did not move to attack. Instead, he gently raised his hand and pushed the weapon aside. It was such a soft gesture, but it carried incredible weight. No one in the dojo expected what came next. Instead of reacting with power or violence, Keanu spoke. His voice was quiet but steady, and every word carried across the room. The attack had ended, but the true lesson was only beginning. The dojo was so quiet that even the sound of breathing could be heard. Everyone waited for Keanu to finally react. The boy with the nunchucks was still standing there, sweat dripping from his forehead, his chest rising and falling quickly. His friends behind him looked less confident now. Their playful grins had faded, replaced by nervous glances. They too wanted to know what Keanu would do next. Keanu stepped forward slowly. His movements were not threatening, not aggressive, but calm and measured. It was the kind of step a teacher might take when approaching a nervous student. The boy raised the nunchucks halfway, unsure if Keanu was about to strike. But instead of fighting back, Keanu simply reached out and gently pushed the weapon aside with one hand. His touch was so soft it was almost like a father brushing dust off his child's shoulder. This simple gesture shocked everyone. They had expected something explosive, something dramatic. After all, Keanu Reeves was famous for fast punches, precise kicks, and breathtaking fight scenes in his movies. But here, in the real world, he chose a response that carried no violence at all. His calmness itself became the strongest action in the room. The boy blinked, confused. His pride had driven him to attack, but now his courage began to melt away. He couldn't understand why Keanu hadn't fought back. Why hadn't he grabbed the nunchucks, twisted his arm, or thrown him to the mat? That's what he would have seen in the movies, but instead, Keanu's face carried only kindness, not anger. "You're fast," Keanu said quietly. His voice was low, almost gentle. The words surprised the boy even more. Instead of criticizing, Keanu was complimenting him. "You've practiced well," he added. The dojo was silent. Every student leaned closer to catch every word. The master himself paused, his eyes narrowing with respect at what was happening. The boy lowered the nunchucks slightly. His hands trembled now, but not from the effort of swinging them. It was from the weight of the moment. The man he tried to embarrass was showing him respect. That respect felt heavier than any strike could have been. Keanu continued. But martial arts is not about hurting, it's not about showing power, it's about control, about respect. His words were simple, but they carried a strength no weapon could match. The dojo, which had been filled with the sound of wooden strikes and loud training earlier, now felt like a temple. Every student listened as if the walls themselves were holding onto his words. He did not raise his voice. He did not try to dominate the room with volume. Yet every ear caught his calm tone. It was as though his quietness demanded attention more strongly than any shout could have. The boy lowered his gaze, unable to meet Keanu's eyes anymore. His face flushed red, and the nunchucks in his hand suddenly felt heavy and useless. One of the younger students in the back whispered softly, "He's not fighting, but he's winning." The words were true. Keanu's calm presence was more powerful than any attack. He had turned the dojo into a place of reflection rather than conflict. The boy stepped back, embarrassed, but Keanu reached out again, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. There was no anger in his touch, only understanding. "It's okay," Keanu said. "We all make mistakes when we let our pride lead us. The real strength is learning from it." The master of the dojo, who had been watching closely, bowed his head slightly in respect. He could see that the lesson being taught right now was far greater than any technique practiced in the dojo that evening. The students were not just watching a movie star. They were watching a man live the true spirit of martial arts. The boy finally lowered the nunchucks completely and bowed his head. He did not need to be scolded. He had already been silenced by the power of kindness. His friends behind him also grew quiet, ashamed of encouraging him. They realized that Keanu's calm response had turned their little game into a life lesson. Around the room, the other students felt something stir inside them. They were moved by what they had seen. They understood that martial arts was not just about punches and kicks. It was about humility, self-control, and respect for others. They had all heard these lessons before from their master, but now, seeing Keanu live them so naturally, made the words shine brighter. Keanu stepped back, giving the boy space. He bowed respectfully, not just to the master of the dojo, but also, to the young students. It was a gesture of equality. He was not placing himself above them. He was showing that even a man who had trained with professionals, who had starred in movies that millions admired, still considered himself a student, still valued humility. The dojo, which had been restless with tension moments ago, now felt calm again. The students returned to their stances, but their energy was different. They were quieter, more thoughtful. Their respect for the dojo, for their master, and even for each other seemed to have deepened, all because of one man's calm response to an unnecessary attack. For the boy with the nunchucks, this moment would stay with him forever. Years later, he would look back and realize that Keanu's calmness had taught him more than any sparring match could have. At that moment, he had learned that silence can be stronger than noise, that kindness can be sharper than any blade, and that true martial arts is not about defeating others, but about defeating your own ego. The boy slowly lowered the nunchucks, his arms tired and his pride even more tired. He had attacked again and again, yet Keanu had not fought back. Instead, he had only moved with calm steps, avoiding every strike as if he was walking through the wind. The dojo was filled with whispers, but the voices soon faded. Everyone waited for what Keanu would say because by now they understood that his silence carried more strength than any punch. Keanu took a slow breath. His eyes scanned the room, moving from the young children at the back to the proud teenagers in front, and then to the dojo master who was standing quietly. His expression was gentle, not angry, not mocking, just calm. When he finally spoke, his words were soft but heavy, as if they carried the weight of something greater than the moment. "Martial arts is not about hurting people," he said. The words were simple, but they struck harder than the nunchucks ever could. The students leaned forward without realizing it. Even the boy holding the weapon felt his knees weaken. "It is not about showing off," Keanu continued. "It is about discipline, about respect, about protecting others." The silence in the room deepened. His voice was not loud, yet it reached every ear. It was as though the words themselves carried their own force, traveling through the air and settling into the hearts of everyone present. The dojo that had been filled with noise only moments ago now felt like a sacred space, where wisdom echoed louder than any shout. The boy looked down at the nunchucks in his hand. For the first time, he realized how foolish he must have looked, swinging them not for practice, not for learning, but just to show off. Keanu's words made him feel the truth in his actions. His chest tightened, shame rising inside him. He had wanted to humiliate someone else, but instead he had embarrassed himself. One of the younger students, barely 10 years old, whispered to his friend, "He's right." His voice trembled with awe. The other child nodded quickly, afraid to even blink. They were too young to fully understand, but they could feel the power in Keanu's words. It was like listening to a story that would stay with them forever. Keanu stepped back slightly, giving the boy space. His body language showed no victory, no sense of triumph. He wasn't trying to win anything. He was simply sharing what he believed. That was what made his words even stronger. They came from honesty, not from pride. The dojo master, who had seen many students rise and fall in skill and character, bowed his head deeply. It was a silent sign that he agreed with every word Keanu spoke. The master's approval added even more weight, and the students realized they had just witnessed something rare, a lesson that was not written in any textbook or taught in regular training. The boy who had attacked finally lowered his head. His hands dropped to his sides and the nunchuck slipped from his grip, landing softly on the mat. He could no longer meet Keanu's eyes. Instead, he stared at the floor, ashamed. Yet even in this moment of defeat, Keanu did not mock him. He did not make him feel small. Instead, he said quietly, "You are strong, but true strength is not in how hard you can strike. It is in how, well, you can control yourself." The words sank deep into the boy's heart. He had spent years practicing his strikes, his kicks, his movements, believing that power meant victory. But now he understood that without control, without respect, power was nothing but empty noise. His pride melted, replaced by a strange sense of relief. It was as if he had just been freed from carrying a heavy stone. Around the dojo, other students shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had laughed earlier, some had whispered challenges, but now they felt the sting of shame too. They realized that they had been no better than the boy with the nunchucks. They had encouraged him, pushed him, hoping for entertainment. But Keanu's words had revealed their mistake. The silence in the room was no longer heavy with tension. It was heavy with reflection. Keanu looked around once more. His expression was soft. "Respect is not only for your teacher or for the dojo," he said. "It is for each other, for every person you meet. That is the heart of martial arts." The words rolled through the room like a quiet wave, touching everyone, even the students who had not moved during the challenge. Some felt their eyes sting with emotion. Others swallowed hard, realizing that this lesson was bigger than anything they had learned through sparring or drills. For a moment, time felt as if it had stopped. The boy bowed deeply, his forehead nearly touching the mat. He could not say anything, but his silence spoke enough. His friends behind him followed, bowing as well. They too had been humbled, not by a fight, but by words that carried the weight of truth. The dojo master finally broke the silence. His voice was calm but filled with respect. "Tonight," he said, "we all received a lesson we will not forget." His eyes met Keanu's, and in that moment, there was a shared understanding. The students were lucky, for they had not just trained that evening, they had been shown the soul of martial arts. Keanu bowed politely in return, his face still carrying the same humble expression. He had not come to teach, yet somehow he had left behind a lesson greater than any planned training session. The students would remember his words for years, telling the story again and again about the time Keanu Reeves silenced a whole dojo, not with violence, but with kindness and wisdom. The dojo was still wrapped in silence after Keanu's words. It was the kind of silence that did not feel empty but full of thoughts, emotions, and realizations. The boy who had attacked stood frozen, his face lowered, his pride slowly dissolving into something new. His friends beside him shifted uncomfortably. They had pushed him to act, but now they too felt the weight of shame pressing down on their shoulders. Around the room, the younger students whispered quietly to one another, but even their whispers carried respect. They were not laughing anymore. They were not giggling or mocking. They were looking at Keanu with wide eyes, as if they had just witnessed something far greater than any fight scene they had ever seen in a movie. The older students, who had once smirked with pride and folded their arms, now found themselves staring at the floor. They replayed the moment in their minds, the wild swings of the nunchucks, the calm steps of Keanu, the soft but powerful words. Each of them felt a sting inside because deep down they realized they had allowed their pride to cloud their judgment too. They had forgotten the true spirit of martial arts. The dojo master stood still at the edge of the mat. His eyes were fixed on Keanu, but his thoughts ran deeper. He had spent years teaching his students discipline, humility, and respect. Yet in just a few moments, Keanu had shown them the same lessons in a way that pierced their hearts. The master felt admiration. He saw that what Keanu carried inside him was not just skill, but wisdom. Keanu himself looked calm. He did not stand proudly as if he had won. He did not look down on anyone. Instead, he carried himself with the same humility he had walked in with. His eyes were soft, his shoulders relaxed, his presence filled the room, but it was not heavy. It was peaceful. The boy with the nunchucks bent down, picked them up, and carefully placed them back on the weapon rack. His hands were still trembling, but now it was not from excitement. It was from the realization of what he had done. He had broken the respect of the dojo. He had tried to use martial arts for pride instead of discipline, and now he could feel the weight of his mistake. When he turned back, Keanu gave him a small nod. Not a nod of victory, but of forgiveness. It was as if he was silently saying, "It's all right, you can grow from this." That single nod eased the boy's shame more than any punishment could have. He bowed deeply, his forehead almost touching the mat. The entire dojo followed, one after another, bowing to Keanu out of respect. The atmosphere began to change. What had started as tension and arrogance had now turned into reflection. Students sat quietly, their minds heavy with thoughts. They began to think about their own journeys in martial arts. They thought of the times they had shown off during sparring, the times they had mocked weaker students, the times they had let ego take control. Each memory stung, but now those stings felt like lessons. Keanu's presence had become like a mirror, showing them who they really were, and at the same time, who they could become. They realized that true strength was not about striking harder or moving faster. It was about having the control to not strike at all, about showing kindness even when provoked, about staying calm when others expected anger. The dojo master finally stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but it carried authority. "Tonight, we have seen what real martial arts means," he said. "It is not about defeating others, it is about defeating the pride inside us. It is about respect, discipline, and humility." His words echoed in the hearts of his students, but they all knew they had already heard them once before that night, from Keanu. The students nodded slowly. Some of them even felt tears sting their eyes, not from sadness, but from the powerful realization that they had been taught something priceless. It was a lesson that no number of kicks or punches could ever give them. The boy with the nunchuck sat down quietly on the mat. His pride had been broken, but in its place, something stronger was growing. He felt lighter, as if he had dropped a heavy burden. He thought about Keanu's calmness, his kindness, his forgiveness, and he silently promised himself that from this day on, he would train not for pride but for discipline and respect. The dojo slowly returned to its training, but the energy was different now. The sound of punches and kicks filled the air again, but it was sharper, cleaner, more focused. The students were no longer training to show off. They were training with humility. Each bow they gave felt deeper. Each movement carried more meaning. Keanu watched quietly from the side, his face still calm. He did not need to speak anymore. His words had already done their work. He had not planned to teach, yet he had given one of the greatest lessons the dojo had ever received. The students would later talk about this night again and again. Some would tell their families, some would tell their friends. They would describe how Keanu Reeves walked into their dojo and, without throwing a single punch, changed the way they thought about martial arts. They would remember how he silenced the room not with power but with wisdom, not with violence but with kindness. And deep in their hearts, every student knew they had been given a gift, the gift of reflection, the gift of seeing martial arts in its truest form, the gift of realizing that the real battle was not against another person, but against their own pride. After the tension faded and the dojo returned to quiet practice, everyone's eyes still found their way back to Keanu. There was something different about the air around him. It wasn't just because he was a famous actor, it was because of the way he carried himself, with a kind of gentle respect that many of the students had never seen before. The boy who had attacked sat quietly on the mat, ashamed but thoughtful. He kept his head low, trying to process everything that had just happened. He expected Keanu to ignore him now, or maybe to scold him, but instead Keanu surprised everyone by walking toward him. His steps were steady, calm, and filled with kindness. When he reached the boy, Keanu bent slightly and bowed. A respectful bow, not the shallow kind one gives out of habit, but a deep, meaningful bow that carried sincerity. The dojo gasped softly. Nobody expected a world-famous star to bow to the very person who had attacked him. Yet here he was, lowering himself in humility. The boy's eyes widened, his heart pounded. He could not understand what was happening. This man, who could have humiliated him easily, who could have struck him down with a single move, was instead showing him honor. His throat tightened, and for the first time that evening he felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes. Keanu's voice was soft. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for showing me your spirit. Thank you for reminding me that we are all still learning." His words were not sarcastic, not mocking. They were pure and honest. The dojo went completely silent again, because the kindness in his tone was something no one expected. The master of the dojo bowed deeply in return. Moved by Keanu's humility, the students followed, some quickly, some slowly, but all with respect. Even the youngest ones understood that this moment was special. Keanu had not come to prove himself as stronger. He had come to remind them all that kindness and respect are greater than ego. The boy with the nunchucks shook his head, still unable to believe what was happening. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. But Keanu smiled gently and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes," he replied. "It is what we do after the mistake that matters." Those words melted the boy's shame into something new, hope. Instead of feeling crushed, he felt lifted, as if someone had placed a guiding hand on his back, pushing him forward on a better path. The other students watched in awe. They realized that true greatness was not in strength or fame. It was in kindness. Keanu had shown them that even when he was tested, even when he was provoked, he chose compassion. He chose forgiveness. He chose to treat others with dignity. What impressed them even more was how natural it seemed for him. It was not an act, not a performance. His kindness was part of who he was. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand respect. He simply gave it, and in doing so, he received it from everyone in the room. The dojo master stepped forward and spoke, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "Tonight you have reminded us of what we sometimes forget," he said. "Martial arts is not only about power, but about heart. And your heart has shown us, more than any technique could." The students nodded in agreement. Their respect for Keanu grew deeper, not because of his fame, but because of his humanity. Keanu bowed again to the master and then to the students. His bow was slow and graceful. It was a gesture that said, "I am no greater than you. We are all the same." This simple act touched everyone. They realized that a man known across the world for playing unstoppable heroes was, in truth, more impressive when he showed humility. One by one, the students approached him. Some bowed, some simply smiled, and a few quietly said, "Thank you." Keanu responded to each with kindness, never rushing, never dismissing. He gave each student his full attention, as if they were the only person in the room. The boy who had attacked finally found the courage to bow again, deeper this time. His voice cracked as he said, "I'm sorry." Keanu smiled warmly. "You don't need to be sorry," he replied. "You just need to keep learning." Those words felt like a gift, a reminder that mistakes did not define him. What he chose next would. The dojo, once filled with pride and noise, had been transformed. Now it was a place of reflection, humility, and gratitude, and it was not because of a fight, but because of kindness. The students would never forget the image of Keanu Reeves bowing to a young student who had attacked him. That single act had silenced their arrogance and filled them with respect. As the training resumed, the energy was different. There was no more showing off, no more whispering challenges. Every strike, every movement carried sincerity. The dojo felt lighter, more united, as if Keanu's kindness had washed away the pride that once hung in the air. Keanu stayed for a while longer, watching quietly, offering small words of encouragement, smiling gently when a young student made progress. He blended into the dojo, not as a star but as a fellow learner, And when he finally left, he did so with the same quiet steps he had entered with, leaving behind not fame, but inspiration. Long after Keanu had left the dojo, the room still felt different. The mats were the same, the walls were the same, the students were the same, but their hearts had changed. It was as if his calm presence had left behind an invisible mark, something they could not see but could feel deeply. The boy with the nunchucks sat quietly for a long time after the training ended. His friends no longer teased him or pushed him to show off. They too were quiet, reflecting on what had happened. The boy replayed every moment in his mind. The swings, the missed strikes, the calmness in Keanu's eyes, and the gentle words that had silenced him. He realized that this memory would never leave him. For the younger students, the story became almost like a legend. They whispered about it, to each other in the changing rooms, at school, and even to their families. "Keanu Reeves came to our dojo," they said proudly, "and he didn't fight, but he taught us the most important lesson." Their voices carried excitement, but also respect. They understood that they had been part of something rare. The older students reflected more deeply. They had been training for years, but that night showed them that experience meant nothing without humility. They realized that no matter how many belts they earned or how many techniques they mastered, they would never truly grow if they let ego control them. Keanu's calmness had opened their eyes, and many of them decided from that night onward to train with a new mindset. The dojo master felt the impact most strongly. He had always told his students that martial arts was not about fighting but about building character. Yet he knew that sometimes his words did not reach their hearts. They nodded, they bowed, but many still secretly chased pride. But Keanu had shown them through his actions, and that was far more powerful than lectures. The master silently thanked him in his heart, knowing that the lesson would stay alive in his students for years. Days turned into weeks, but the memory never faded. The boy who had attacked changed noticeably. He no longer bragged during training. He no longer swung weapons recklessly to show off. Instead, he trained quietly, focusing on his discipline. His strikes grew cleaner, his movements sharper, but most importantly, his attitude softer. He started helping younger students with patience, offering advice kindly instead of proudly. People noticed, and soon they understood that Keanu's words had touched him the deepest. One evening, as practice ended, the boy spoke softly to the master. "I want to be better, not stronger but better." The master smiled, for he could see that the lesson had rooted itself in the boy's heart. That single moment of arrogance had become the turning point in his journey, and it all happened because Keanu chose kindness instead of pride. Outside the dojo, the story spread. Students told their friends, parents told their neighbors, and soon people from other dojos began to hear it too. Everyone was amazed, not because Keanu Reeves had visited, but because of what he had done. They expected tales of skill, of flashy demonstrations, but instead they heard about humility, forgiveness, and wisdom. People shared the story online as well, and it traveled far, reaching those who had never stepped into a dojo. Readers felt inspired. Some said it reminded them to be kind at work. Some said it helped them forgive someone. Some said it showed them that even heroes could be humble. The impact of that night had traveled far beyond the walls of the dojo for the students who were there. The story became a personal memory they carried like a treasure. Whenever they felt pride rising, they remembered Keanu's calm face. Whenever they wanted to show off, they remembered his soft words. Whenever they thought of martial arts as only fighting, they remembered the lesson he left behind even years later. The dojo master would sometimes pause during training and remind his students of that night. "Remember," he would say, "the night when humility walked through our doors and silenced arrogance." And every student, whether they were there or not, felt the weight of that story. It became part of the dojo's spirit, passed down like an unspoken rule. Keanu himself probably never told the story to the world. That was his nature. He didn't act out of a need for recognition. He didn't stay for applause. He gave his kindness freely and then left quietly. But for those who were present, his actions had become something unforgettable. They didn't just see a famous actor. They saw a man who lived by the principles of respect and compassion. The boy who had once attacked grew into a young man with a different attitude. He became one of the dojo's most respected students, not because of his skill alone, but because of his humility. When new students came and tried to show off, he was the first to remind them gently of what martial arts truly meant. He became living proof that a single moment of kindness can change the path of a life. And so the story lived on, not as gossip, not as a tale of celebrity, but as a reminder of something greater. The lesson was clear. True strength is not found in fists, nor in fame, nor in power. True strength is in kindness, in calmness, in respect. That was what silenced the dojo that night. That was what stayed in their hearts long after Keanu walked away.